Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we have a Tasha the Witch Queen Steal Your Stuff Commander with a title I really do like. Your stuff is my stuff. Thank you, sweetie. I hope when you play this deck, you always thank people as you steal their cards. This deck comes to us from Blocus Energy, who says, I would love to hear your thoughts. My budget Tasha deck is turning just fine. I didn't build it from scratch, just modified another deck list by 3 or 4 cards. Only thing I could say, takes time to start, but hey, does its job and is hella fun. Well, let's see what we can do to assist this deck so it doesn't take as much time to start, and perhaps give it a few more pieces that I feel like it's missing. Because even when we have a deck that's themed around one thing, such as stealing your opponent's cards, we shouldn't forget the basics of our colors and the basics of good deck building and make sure we have a solid foundation to build forward on. As always, this deck list will be in the video description below, and I highly recommend you go and take a look at it. Steal Your Stuff Commander deck lists are really interesting because their power level really varies upon who you're playing against and who uh, and their power, right? Because some cards you're going to be able to steal are really, really good, and some cards you're going to be able to steal aren't as good. So, with that in mind, the power level of a lot of these cards is variable. So, if you are one of those players that likes playing blue black steal your stuff, I would love if you put in a comment of your favorite, cards that you use to steal things so that we can help Blocus Energy. Because this is a type of deck I'm not too familiar with. I'm a much more proactive player, and therefore I'm not used to taking my opponent's stuff and using it for myself. So before we get any further, let's look at Tasha the Witch Queen and figure out why we're using her. She is a 5 mana planeswalker that comes with 4 loyalty. She has a passive that says whenever you cast a spell that you do not own, you create a 3/3 black demon creature token. And then for +1, draw a card, and then you exile up to 1 instant and sorcery from each of your opponent's graveyards with a page counter. And then her -3 allows you to cast one of those page countered cards in exile for free. So, why Tasha? Well, Tasha's interesting because she does 3 kind of unrelated things. I know it's a weird way of putting it, but I think the main thing about Tasha is we really like her passive ability. Her ability to just pump out 3/3s while you are doing what your deck wants to do is incredibly powerful. Her +1 is good. You're mainly using it to draw a card, and as the deck continues, you're aiming to find the right spell to cast with a page counter. But until you find that right spell, the +1 is the main thing you're doing, right? And so getting ahead on cards that way is really, really nice. And then when you find the perfect card you want to cast, you can -3 her, and that's pretty strong. She kind of protects herself by as you cast other people's spells, but that's kind of a thing that's, you need a right setup to be able to do that while casting Tasha the same turn. So generally you will have to protect her, but all in all, she does a lot of things, and she can set up a really wide board very quickly if you have the right draws. So looking at this deck, I think the first thing we're going to go, as we always do, and look at the mana curve, and we're going to see the main thing I'm going to try to address. Our mana curve is a little tough, and that's fine. We have a deck that has a lot of very, very strong spells, but we kind of have a lopsided method of getting there, right? We have very high cards in 2, then we have a little less than 3 and a little less than 4. 5 is very, very low, which I particularly like because that instant and commander colors are almost identical. I can see the difference on my screen. I don't know if you can see on yours, but very, very hard to tell. But we can see that we have only 4 5 mana cards, which I really, really like because our commander is 5 mana. But we do have quite a few 6 and 7 mana cards. So that is a direction I want to attack in. I want to look at all of the high mana spells that we have, and I want us to be a little critical of which ones we can get away with. Also, I see a few cards here that definitely seem weaker than the others, and I think that we can replace them. A lot of my suggestions are going to be more focused on general backbone of a blue-black deck, and less so things on theme. I know that can seem boring. We're not putting 10 more cards that steal, a bunch of other spells from your opponents, but that's kind of the name of the game, right? A lot of the time when we get a deck on this channel, the deck builder has already thought of all of the most fun cards that work on theme, but it is the deck that is built around it that sometimes needs help. You know, if we build this up, we can have a situation where the deck builder doesn't feel like it takes too long to start. That they feel even in the early game that they're being proactive and working towards the end game of casting Tasha and stealing tons of spells. So let's start by looking at our really high mana cost cards. I'm mainly going to look at the creatures, but then we'll look at the rest and see what sticks out and what we want to keep. So, starting at the highest mana cost at 7 cost, we have four 7 cost cards. Actually, 5 I'm seeing now. Regardless, Silent Blade Oni, which I'm going to click so that we can see it a little bigger. Silent Blade Oni is a 6/5 big demon ninja, 6 mana ninjutsu. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand. You may cast a spell among those cards without playing its mana cost. I really, really like this card. I really like Silent Blade Oni, and something I'm going to get to in a bit is that I like the ninjas in this deck. I think this deck can kind of get away with a slight ninja theme because there's a lot of creatures that have either good enter the battlefield effects or other effects that we would love to ninjutsu. So despite what I just said about adding only kind of like good basics, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm probably going to suggest that you play some more ninjas. But Silent Blade Oni, great. Very easy to set up, is actually a 6th drop and not a 7th drop. I'm a big fan, so we can absolutely keep that. Elder Brain, whenever it attacks, exile all cards from their hand, then they draw that many cards. You can play lands as long as they remain exiled. Okay, so this I don't like as much, and the main reason I don't like it is that unlike our ninja, we are paying the full 7 mana, and it is not an enter the battlefield ability. It is an attack ability. It is a very strong attack ability. Don't get me wrong, but it is an attack ability nonetheless. If you cast Elder Brain, you have attracted the attention of everyone at the table because they are all looking at their hand and worried about losing it. So Elder Brain most often will not make the circle around. So I see it as being one of our weaker 7 mana cards. Let's look at the other ones. Druid Primordial, I think, is really, really strong because unlike the Elder Brain, it has an enter the battlefield effect, so I like it more. I think one of the problems with it is that it competes with Tasha, right? Because you're going to want to start exiling the most powerful instants and sorceries with Tasha as soon as possible. Even if you're not going to trigger Tasha the next or activate Tasha's -3 the next turn, you still want that with a page counter because as long as it's there, later in the game you have access to it. It's like permanently put away. So with that in mind, Diluvian Primordial kind of gets a little weaker because you need to be able to play this card in between Tasha effects. You need to play this where there's still good cards to cast, or even, I guess at a certain point, just cards to cast, and yet, not ones you've exiled with Tasha. So though this is already I like it more than Elder Brain, it competes with our commander, and so I don't really like the space that it exists in. Finally, we have Brainsealer Dragon. At the beginning of your end step, exile the top card of each opponent's library. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. If you cast a spell this way, you spend mana of any color. And then whenever a non-land permanent an opponent owns enters the battlefield under your control, they lose life to equal to its mana value. if you've just heard me talk about two 7 drops and the reasons I don't like them, you can immediately see why I really like Brainsealer Dragon. One, that art is sick. I really, really like this card's flavor. I think it's really, really cool. But much more straightforwardly, it does all of the things that I want it to do. Its ability triggers not on enter the battlefield, but on one of the next closest things on your end step. There's not a lot of phases in between that. And so if no one can destroy it in response immediately, you will start getting the ability. Second, it doesn't compete with Tasha, right? Its ability is completely separate from Tasha, and therefore you don't have to worry about. Yeah, maybe you'll flip a really good, instance or sorcery that you wish would have been milled to the graveyard, but that's just the luck of the draw. It hasn't directly, had a problem with Tasha's taking instants and sorceries from your opponent's graveyard. And finally, for what it's worth, this card is a lot less scary than Elder Brain, right? Elder Brain is terrifying because when you play Elder Brain, everyone thinks you're going to discard their hand, and they're not going to react well to this. Whereas this card right here, Brainsealer Dragon, represents them losing the top card of their deck, which is pretty negligible for most decks. Most players won't be too bothered by that. They don't see it as much of a threat as losing their entire hand, even if they would draw a new hand. This is maybe I should make a video about this, but like this is the kind of things when we talk about like threat level, it's not the real threat level of the card. It is the perceived threat level of the card. And Brainsealer Dragon has a much lower perceived threat level than Elder Brain does. So all in all, really love this card. I would like you to keep this for sure. Looking at our 6 mana, we have Xanathar, who says at the beginning of upkeep, choose an opponent. That player can't cast spells. Until end of turn, that player can cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library anytime. You may play the top card of their library, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast spells this way. I don't like this. I don't like Xanathar because it's it's like the worst of all the world. Like it is the worst version of the dragon we just looked at, right? First of all, we have to keep Xanathar around for an entire turn cycle for him to do, well, I'm assuming gender here, for the beholder to do anything, right? That's a really, really long time. After that, you have to pick an opponent, so it's not even all three of your opponents like the dragon, and then you are relegated to their top card, and you can cast all of their top cards or play them, but that's not the same power level, right? If you had to play a land to have mana, and you look at their top card and it's a land, well, this didn't do anything outside of shutting down an opponent for your turn. And spoiler, if they had removal and you targeted them, they're just going to cast the removal anyways. In response to the trigger, so you're not really going to silence them in the traditional way. After that, you might say, well, Curse Deck Builder, I didn't play a land, so when I look at their deck and there's a land on top, I get to play that land. Okay, that's fair. What about the next land? What about when you look at the top card of their deck and there's a counter spell? What about when you look at the top card of their deck and there's like Village Rites or another hyper specific, card to their strategy? I really like stealing people's cards, but a big part of that is the selection you gain of stealing people's cards. Tasha does not, pick one card on top of the deck and that's it. Tasha creates a collection of cards. The dragon does pick one card from the top of the deck, but it's 3 at a time, and you get to keep those forever. So there's the benefit. Whereas Xanathar, honestly, I don't really feel like it does a lot, and it takes a really long time to do nothing. And therefore, I don't think it should make the cut at 6 mana. Rexial, I don't think in good conscience I can say no to Rexial. I think it is a really, really silly card, but I will say, for what it's worth, it does compete with Tasha once again. We want to be really, really, we just want to be really, choosy about the cards that directly compete with our commander. I think I usually talk about a mana cost. You shouldn't play a lot of 5 drops because Tasha's a 5 drop. But here we have cards that are, literally competing with our with our commander's main ability. And maybe main ability is wrong, because one of the things with Rexial is that we can use them to, you know, cast a card and get a 3/3 from Tasha, but that's just, you know, that's a lot of things that need to go right. You need to untap with this creature. You need to have not have already exiled the best spells out of their graveyard with Tasha. Because you have to remember, even if you have Rexial and then you know you're gonna play them, you know you have Tashas, you know you're seeing their graveyards, right? You might you might still have to exile the instants or sorceries out of their graveyard. There's a lot of commanders, especially a lot of blue commanders, that love returning instants and sorceries from their graveyards to their hands or graveyards into play over and over again, especially, take other turn spells and the like. And you cannot take that risk by leaving that in there for a prolonged period of time. So really, you have to exile with Tasha. So unfortunately, as much as I say I don't want to say no to this card because it's a really fun card and it's a very classic card. Like this card came out when I started Magic, so I have so much World Wake. I have so much love for it, but honestly, I think it has to go because it's too much mana and fights with Tasha. Um, Immediately after, we go into our 5 drops. There's only one, and I think the rest I'm going to leave. But Fallen Shinobi is fantastic. Once again, no problem with these ninjas. I think they're really good. I think they work really well with your deck, and I would like to see you play more of them. In fact, very, very briefly, what I am going to do is we're going to look at the ninjas now in our colors that you could be playing that I think you should for free because you have room in your deck for sure. So let's do that. Let's search our black blue ninjas. Go by, I don't even think we need to go by EDH rec rank because they're all here. The main ones I would suggest you play: Ingenious Infiltrator makes it so every ninja you hit will draw a card. A little bit of card draw is really, really nice. And then Moon Circuit Hacker you could play. It's an interesting card that draws the first time and then loots every other time. Now she's a ninja. I know you're playing it, but I had forgotten. I just think her main ability is so good, I completely forgot about it. And that's probably it. I think Thousand Face Shadow is close. Yuriko is really, really close, just as a very, very strong card in itself. But if nothing else, you should definitely play. Oh, where did I miss? Yeah, there we go. Ninja of the Deep Hours as well. But you should definitely be playing Ingenious Infiltrator because it just works really, really good with the rest of your ninjas. And so I would heavily, heavily consider playing that. All right. Just want to make sure you weren't already playing it and I forgot about it. Okay. So from that point on, after I'm a big fan of most of the creatures you're playing. I think a few kind of stick out at me as being not as strong. Siren of the Silent, excuse me, Siren of the Silent Song. Man, say that a bunch of times. Um, I think is one, has fantastic art, but two, is not really on theme to what you're doing. I get that it mills, I get that it discards. Both of these things are very, very cool for our commander, but it's a lot of hoops. You know, when you think about it, this is almost worse than an on attack trigger because you have to attack with her and then a whole turn cycle. So that's 2 turn cycles. You play this card, you can't attack, comes to you, you attack, comes back to you, you untap, and you get this trigger. That's a lot. I think that's too much. I don't think you should be playing this. It's a lot of work to get this trigger. And this is the kind of thing I think that slows down your deck. That we look at this deck and this card and we hyper focus on its pretty good ability. The fact that every turn you're milling each of your opponents, you're making them each discard a card, is really, really good. However, the amount of time it takes to do that, and then let's just compare it to a card such as something rumors, I believe. Vicious Rumors. I've misspelled that before, so let's take a look. Vicious Rumors deals is 1 damage to each opponent. Each of them discard a card. Each of them mill a card, and you gain 1 life. I know this feels like a ridiculous comparison, but it takes. So you cast it, you do it. It takes 3 turns for Siren of the Silent Song to do what Vicious Rumor does once, granted with 1 less mill. It takes 3 turns for triple the mana, and at any point that creature can be destroyed or be put in a situation where it cannot attack without dying. Because remember, if you attack into your spirit's friend and this creature gets destroyed, well, you don't get the inspired trigger. So, not a huge fan. Likewise, love Halo Forger. Guard Gomazoa is a card that also I started playing with, and it is not where you want to be. If you want this ability, you should just play Propaganda or a board clear, because unfortunately, it is not very good. Gixian Skullflare as well, not an ideal card. It just doesn't really synergize with your things, and it feels like it's just there to kind of pad out the deck. I recognize, I've been going through this, and I recognize a lot of things I'm saying are situations where this is a budget deck, but there are better budget, cards you can put into a deck like this than something like the Taxian Skullflare. And we want to keep our cards low mana, and we want them to be on theme. That's pretty much it for creatures. I do really like that. Finally, let's look at the other really high mana costs here in our other zones. Um, Necromantic Selection is perfectly fine. It's your only board clear, which I don't really like, but it is on theme. You are going to blow up the board and steal the best creature. I think I'm fine with this. 7 mana is a lot, but at the same time, it's wiping the board and leaving you with a creature, so I do like it. Xander's Pact is each opponent exiles a top card. You may cast spells among those cards this turn. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal. Okay. I do like this. I do really like this. I think the casualty is a bit hard for you to pay, but not impossible. Just because your creatures are pretty integral to your game plan, and you don't want to just. I guess you can sacrifice Solemn Simulacrum. I guess that's fine. Okay, I do like this. I think this could be one of the most powerful cards in your deck, and I think if used at the right time, giving you the ceiling is rather high. The floor is kind of bad though, right? The floor is what we flip three cards that don't do anything. They don't have to be lands, but they could be cards that just like for example, if you flip Nature's Lore, which is tutor for a forest into play, you can't flip that. That might as well be like a card you can't play. Or you flip a counter spell, that's a card you can't play. And I believe this only lets you cast them immediately, right? You may cast this turn. So you have to cast them during the turn. I don't want to just say I don't want to just say no, but I think you should be critical on this card. It is a really cool card, but unfortunately, sometimes it's just going to miss. And a card of this, like I can say the same thing here with Dead Man's Chest, right? Dead Man's Chest is a card that sometimes it's just gonna miss. You're gonna flip three cards off, right? Or is its power? Yeah, you're gonna flip an arbitrary number of cards, and no matter if you flip between like 3 cards to 6 cards, sometimes you're just not gonna get the cards you want, right? But this is a 2 mana card, whereas Xander's card is a 6 mana card, Xander's Pact. So I'm going to be a little hesitant on this. Likewise, Extract from Darkness. I think this is fine. I was going to be a lot more critical about it, but then I remember the milling that it does is just very relevant to the deck. So I think at 5 mana, this is fine. This is perfectly fine to play here and can be particularly strong with Tasha. Obviously, it competes with Tasha at the same mana space, but I think it's fine because clearly you want Tasha first. All right. Rest of these I think are generally fine. Predator's Hour is such a good card that I want people to play more, and I'm really glad you're playing it. Um, if you play more ninjas, I'm going to tell you to keep this. I think you need just 28 isn't bad. I just don't know if you produce enough creatures for this to be more than drawing, than exiling 2 or 3 cards, which, to be fair, maybe that's just fine, right? Maybe just exiling for the rest of the game, you know, 3 cards, 2 mana, draw 3 is not bad at all. So you know what? Keep it. I'm actually gonna click it to make it a little bigger. I really like Predator's Hour. This is my. I don't do it often, but here's my, YouTube streamer's pet card I'm going to try to sell you on. I think Predator's Hour in creature decks that have black is just a really strong card. It has such a low floor, which is the main thing it's ignored by, but if you have the means and the room to play a card like this, and you have the right kind of setup to capitalize on it, it's just really, really strong. The ability to, perhaps overextend one turn to hit an opponent with like 5 creatures, especially if you have tokens, will put you so far ahead, potentially, but out of the top 5 cards of their deck, you're probably going to find something that you'd be happy to grab. So I really like this card. And also the fact that it gives menace, I think, is pretty cool. Okay, so that's all good. Let's go to the next ones. Spelljack, counter target spell. If it's countered, you may play it without paying the mana cost. I like this. I wish it was less mana, but we're going to find a solution to that real soon. So I think this is fine. No problem here. This can definitely win you games when you counter the right spell. Also, in a pinch, you do not need to cast the spell, which is great because there's just going to be some situations where you want to counter a board clear or something like that. This is the only card in your hand. And obviously, you don't want to then cast the board clear. So this will be fine because you don't have to. All right, rest is good. Memory Plunder, I will take a moment to say that it operates on the same spot of Tasha, but you will notice that it is 4 mana, so it is not more mana than Tasha, so you can cast this a turn before Tasha without feeling like you've been, you've removed a card that your commander wants. And it's an instant spell, which means on turns that it is not your turn, before you can get to Tasha to exile it, you can take advantage of a card that goes in the graveyard. Its mana cost is rather prohibitive, but that's not the worst thing. And in fact, we're going to take this moment to transition into the cards I'd like to add. We've gone quite a bit of time on these cards that you have in this deck. So let's talk about the cards that I'd like you to add. And unfortunately, a lot of them are going to be kind of boring cards, but I think they will generally improve the deck. So something I can see immediately, we look at a card like Memory Plunder, right? And then we look at the cards we have here. Soul Ring here does not tap for mana for Memory Plunder. Well, that's fine because it's Soul Ring. But right here, we can also see that Worn Power Stone also does not tap for that mana. So we need to be a bit cognizant of that. So you're already playing Dimmer Signet. You're already playing Felwar Stone. I already like those. There's Talisman of Dominance is one. Now, this does have a bit of a price tag, but I can see here it's been printed at $1 in the Warhammer one. If you don't have the Warhammer art, unfortunately, it's going to be a little more expensive, but it does tap for both of your colors. I think that's really, really good. Oh no, you're already playing it here. My goodness, not my best work. But I actually think you can get away with also playing Charcoal Diamond and Sky Diamond. These are very, very budget choices. And honestly, I think you just benefit from playing a few more Mana Rocks. I was going to say that I like the Mana Rocks more than Ornithopter of Paradise, but with that being said, and with the inclusion of more ninja creatures, perhaps I would suggest keeping the Ornithopter because if nothing else, it can ninja a creature in. However, I think you can put the diamonds in pretty easily, and I think I'd like you to go up a few lands. Even with all of the high cost cards I suggest you take out, you're still kind of low on mana. You have a lot to play, and I think it would be a really good decision to just go up to at least 36 to 37. Just be a lot more able to get your land drops regularly because though Tasha does give you a plus card draw every turn, it is a bit tough when you don't have the 5 mana to play her. Like you need to be able to get there, right? And with that in mind, the next thing I want to talk about is card draw. We are low on card draw. So I want to give you what I give as my general kind of, this is you're in black, you're on a budget, play these draw cards. Knight's Whisper or the more budget option of Sign in Blood. I want to say Sign in Blood is more budget. Yes, it still is good. All right. Sign in Blood, which is a bit harder on your mana with Night Whispers just being a little easier. But both of these cards, 2 mana, draw 2, lose 2 life, really nice. Read the Bones is just a classic, good draw spell in black. You get to look at the top 4. Yeah, well, not literally look at the top 4, you get to look at the top 2. And then if you don't like them, you get to dig 2 deeper. Just really, really good, very underrated by, I think, players who believe a common at this price shouldn't be played. It is very good. Phyrexian Arena just got reprinted recently, always good to pick up. Just has it so every turn you're drawing an additional card, much like Tasha, but this one just comes out 2 turns early, lets you hit your land drops. And then to round it off, I also like Greed. Green's a bit tougher in this deck because um, it is a situation where you do not have ever-flowing mana because you want to cast a 5-drop, you want to cast your occasional 6 and 7 drops, so you might not always have mana open for greed, but on turns you want to hold up your very powerful instants and sorceries, Memory Plunder, Sea Double, Spelljack. You want to hold that up, and the turn cycle finishes, and no one's really played a card you want to steal. Perfect, you have greed. Dump all your black mana into greed and draw a bunch of cards and start the next turn with a big advantage. So those are a few cards I want to suggest. I believe they're all pretty budget, so I think they're really good inclusions. After that, I would really like you to play 1 or 2 more board clears. You are in black. I think you're kind of missing out on removal. Like you are playing a reactive game as if it is a proactive plan. I think if there's one like, you know, general bit of advice I have for this deck, if you take anything from if you take only one thing from this video, let it be this. Your deck is set up with a reactive kind of game plan. Why is it reactive? Well, Tasha needs your opponent to put cards in their graveyard. And a lot of these stealing cards, Fallen Shinobi, Silent Blade Oni, Memory Plunder, a lot of King Narfi's Betrayal, a lot of these cards are really, really good. But one of the things that makes them work is you're dependent on your opponents and you're dependent on how the game is going. You can't just for example, if you mill you play Tasha's and you mill 3 cards from graveyards. You have you have ramp, you have card draw, and you have let's say, I don't know, a reanimation spell. Those are the 3 cards you steal. Each of those cards are going to be good in different boards, right? You have to be aware of what's going on in the game before you use Tasha's ability to cast one of them. If you're low on cards, you got to use card draw. If you're low on mana, use the ramp spell. If there's something to steal or to reanimate, that's good. All of these cards, let's say it was a removal spell, you'll have to see what you have to remove. But you can't, and also doing that, using Tasha's -3, makes her very vulnerable, right? It does create a 3/3, but it does lower her loyalty to a point that it's a lot easier to take her out. So it's a big commitment for you to be using her -3. With that in mind, you need to pay attention to the board. You need to pay attention to what's going on. Memory Plunder is a really, really good card because it represents any card in any instance or sorcery in your opponent's graveyard, but you need instants and sorceries to be there, and you need to cast the right one. So your game plan is reactive. However, you're actually kind of low on traditional reactive or more defensive cards. You have low card draw, you have low ramp, you have low removal. So it really does feel like you're trying to take this reactive strategy and do it proactively. And I think this might make you stumble here and there. It's not game breaking. It's not like your deck will fail if you do that. But I think you're going to benefit a lot more by playing to the deck's strengths and having a few more cards that are, relevant to this kind of game plan. So that in mind, I would like if we could play, a few more removal and board clears. So Infernal Grasp is a very clean black, if I can spell it correctly. Infernal Grasp is a very clean black destroy target creature spell. If you'd like another, Go for the Throat is another very clean one. It can't destroy artifact creatures, but it usually hits most things, which is really, really good. After which, if you really want another, you can start looking into the Doom Blades and Doom Blade and the like of just, is Doom Blade 2 words? Oh no, because of the S. It is 2 words. Doom Blade and other direct removal. You don't need a lot, but having a few is always particularly helpful. And then you have our 7 mana card, but let's go to black and say destroy all. and seeing what other options that we have. I think Bontu's Last Reckoning is too hurtful to this deck. So Damnation, I don't think it's gone down in price. It has not, so we're going to keep going. This is an interesting one. I'm going to keep this open for myself. I don't think it's going to belong here, but it's an interesting card that I didn't know existed. But let's go down. Ritual of Soot is a really nice low mana destruction spell. It's fine. I don't think where it's want to be, but it's priced very low, so it's nice and easy. I think Crux of Fate will probably be one of the first easy ones where you destroy all dragons or non-dragons, and after which we're going to higher mana costs. Um, I think one that interests me is Life's Finale, where it's 6 mana, destroy all creatures, and then you put a few, like their 3 best creatures into their graveyard. I wish this was any card. I wish you could pick instants or sorceries. But what makes this really interesting is that you do play Reanimator spells. Sorry about that. You do play Reanimator spells that can take your opponent's creatures. So this might be setting up on your side in order to set up a reanimation spell that can take one of their creatures. But I think it wouldn't hurt to play one of those cards. Heck, if you really wanted to, I think even just play something akin to Aetherize, return all attacking creatures to your owner's hand, just as an ability for you to react to an opponent who's gotten very, very aggressive against you, which is most likely, I believe, how opponents will deal with a deck like this. So those are the cards and suggestions I want you to think about and go in a direction. There's a lot more we can say, but this is a budget deck, and this is a deck that is kind of finding its way right now. Like, it's clear which parts of it that you really like, and I just want to pull up the rest of the deck to match that power level, because I think in situations where you can't find the ramp, you can't really get your feet off the ground, this deck does really struggle. If you play games where you have Ruin Crab, Fog Bank, Guard Gomazoa, and then you struggle to hit your 4th land to cast all of your 4 drops because you're kind of low on lands, I think it gets a little tricky, right? The deck doesn't really do what it wants to do. And even then, there are just aspects to the deck that just don't work without high mana. Halo Forger is such a good card, but if you don't have the excess mana to use its ability immediately, you're not going to cast it because you don't want to just have a 3/1 black blue, which on the side note, if you have ninjas, you can just run this out as a 3/1, or you can run this out of 3/1 and just add an additional mana to cast like a 1 mana spell from one of your graveyards, right? And then later you ninjutsu it so you can use it again later in the game. It's just what I'm thinking, but you don't have to do that. So a lot of your really good stuff comes in at 4 mana and above. So there are situations where you will be just locked out of hitting your 4 drops, and the deck is just going to struggle. This is why I'm suggesting that we add to the land count, we add just a few more mana rocks, and we add card draw that exists before 4 mana, so that you can feel that you can get into that section of the game, be confident in the fact that you are in a good position to start building your board. And then if you like that kind of direction and you make another draft, we'll look at the next few things on the list. There's still a few cards in here that I think we can be a little more strict on, but that is later. For now, let's start with a few things that you can do to make the deck stronger. Or let's say instead of stronger, let's say successful. If you'd like to send me the next draft of your deck, I would love to see it. There is a form in the video description below, and you can use that to send me a draft of this deck or any deck. And if you would like to bring the deck list that you have sent me to the front of the line, there is a link there for you to do so. There is a lot of decks I have to get through, and therefore it is a bit tough at times to be able to revisit decks easily. So I do really recommend thinking about that. Finally, if you do the like, comment, subscribe YouTube thing, I will always be grateful because it is very, very helpful to the channel and to me. I like Tasha. I like her as the Witch Queen. I think she does something really, really interesting. Her abilities mesh in a way that like it really groks with my brain. And I do really like that. And I want to see more of her. So please think about making another draft of this deck. I would love to see it because I do think it's a lot of fun. And please never forget to say, thank you, sweetie. All right, good luck.